Good.
So I'm George Hoehmann. I'm the supervisor of the town of Clarkstown. Just so you know a little bit about, and I have cards that we can hand out and pass around. And with me is one of our deputy town attorneys, Leslie Kahn, who leads our code enforcement initiative and has done so since I brought her on in 2016 when I became supervisor. So just a little bit about the town of Clarkstown, so you know a little bit about us. We are a pretty sizable town, as population goes. We're the 10th largest town in New York State, with about 88,000 people. We're considered, because of our population, the legal designation of town of the first class, which is any town above 50,000. We are a pretty diverse town, and we're certainly a town that has kind of grappled with how we're going to address development and zoning issues, in a very serious way. So that's kind of just the overview of the town of Clarkstown. I've been town supervisor since January 2016, and upon taking office, there were certainly some issues that I was concerned with that we really wanted to kind of bring to the forefront. And first and foremost, we had a real problem, I think, with kind of a hands-off attitude as it relates to zoning and building code enforcement. And we had one code enforcement officer when I took office. We had about 7 different deputy town attorneys. Many of them were actually kind of more patronage appointments from the prior administrations that had really kind of been installed and entrenched in power, if you will, for about 30 years. And so when I won in 2015, we kind of came in and we cleaned up the town attorney's office, and we started to look at prioritizing how we were going to move forward. And one of the first things we did is we took a quick look at our building and zoning codes, and we made some changes within our zoning laws, where we kind of looked at certain types of uses that we wanted to kind of move out of residential neighborhoods. One of the things that we did is we passed, had some public hearings within the first 6 months of being town supervisor. We passed some local laws that and changed our zoning that kind of took houses of worship, commercial applications, and schools out of residential neighborhoods unless they were on a state or a county road. And we kind of did the evaluation and determined that based upon traffic and those type of traffic generators that we would look to kind of, after some further study, kind of change some of the zoning in that regard. And so that was like an important thing for us to do. In addition to that, we really just kind of looked at our code enforcement, and that's what we're going to focus in on tonight. And there were a bunch of other slight changes we did with the building and zoning code, which was really, really important. But the other thing that we did was we realized, and I realized, that we needed to really be very serious and aggressive about how we enforce our building and zoning code. We had kind of a hands-off attitude, I think, under the prior administration. And from a personal perspective, I can tell you, before I was involved in government, I worked in the not-for-profit world. And I bought my house in Nanuet in 1998. And when I moved into my house, there was an elderly couple that lived across the street from me. My house is kind of an expanded cape. The people across the street had an expanded cape. And the husband got sick within a year or so of us moving in, and he died. And unfortunately, the wife, the widow, the only way she could really make ends meet was to start to rent out rooms. And I watched within a 6-month period as this lovely house, a little bit dated across the street from me, turned into like a nightmare. I wasn't involved in government in any way at that point, just raising my family and someone involved in the community, but not involved in government or politics at all. And we complained to the town, my neighbors complained to the town, and nothing happened. And I'll never forget, a couple of years into it, about 2 years into it, it was a December night, and early evening. I got home from work. My wife was out with my 2 young kids. I went down into the basement. I'm doing some work on the computer. I come up, and the lights in the living room were off, and there's police lights, coming through the window. And I go to the front door, and there's like a perimeter of police cars with assault rifles. There had been a shooting in the house across the street, an argument between two two men in the house, and it was only that incident that forced the town said, okay, we finally have to do something about this illegal house. I could have told you about the comings and goings at all hours of the night. I could have told you about the taxis just coming and laying on the horn, the broken down vehicles in the driveway, and just the deterioration of the quality of life that my wife and I kind of experienced. So I vowed if I ever got into the position or an opportunity to influence public policy locally, that we would certainly change the course within our town. So in 2016, when I got elected, by June, 6 months in, we went in a totally different direction. We reprioritized within our budget. As I said, we had a whole bunch of deputy town attorneys that I did not ask to come back. I kept one. We outsourced, our labor council. We brought in a great outside labor council, one of the best in the state, to help us with some of the contractual stuff. And Leslie Kahn, who happened to be a resident of our town, Leslie had over 20 years experience, 22 at the time? 25. She started when she was 3. But Leslie was 25 years in the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office, and she lived in our town, but she was commuting down to Brooklyn. So she took a pay cut, so she didn't have to do the 2 bridges and come back to our town. And Leslie, was a prosecutor, and that's what I felt that we needed. So we brought in a prosecutor to kind of lead our efforts. And what we're going to talk a little bit about tonight is how we've kind of gone about it, how we've added some code enforcement officers all within kind of the existing budget, how we've kicked up our fines, and how we've really had some great success. And in fact, I can tell you that we've done this presentation before for all of the municipalities in Rockland County, and we don't target anybody. We target anybody that isn't following the law. There's a speed limit driving up here, what is it, 40 miles, 45 miles an hour on the local road here. If you do 45, expect to get a ticket. In our town, if you buy a single-family house and you illegally convert it, we're going to come after you. And we're going to be nice about it. We're going to do our, we'll find out about it. We're going to send people out. You'll get a period of time to correct it. If you don't correct it, we're going to bring it to court. And we're going to use our justice court. And frankly, one of the other things we're going to talk about tonight is, for those people that don't want to cooperate with us, or they're not going to work with us, and they're not going to allow our people access, we're going to go into our justice court and we're going to get search warrants. And Leslie will talk about how you can do that for property violations. We're the only municipality in Rockland County doing that. That's made a big difference as well. Since Leslie's come on, we've executed over 36 search warrants for folks that have not allowed us to get access into their property. And you make your case, you got your evidence, and that helps strengthen your case when you get into court. We've had real success in taking folks that have done land speculation in our town and have bought single-family houses and have taken those single-family houses and have illegally converted them without permits, or they've gotten a permit and they've gone ahead and done more work than was supposed to be done, where they've cut them up. I mean, we've had instances where we've had single-family homes turned into 2- or 3-family homes. We've had incidents of a 2-family home turned into a 5-family home, and we've gone after those aggressively. And the numbers show it, and I think people realize and understand in our town that we mean business, and I think it's also kind of helped in terms of our overall approach in terms of how things are going within our town. We've had real success. We've had people buy houses, illegally convert them, and we've gotten them converted back, and then we've actually had people sell those houses. Decide, okay, I'm not going to, my profit margin isn't going to be what it's going to be because this town is going to come after me. They did in the past. They're going to make sure that I follow the law. And because of that, we've actually seen people reconvert those properties and then put them back out on the market so they become what they were intended to be, single-family homes. Because the message we convey is very clear, and I'll finish up with this as the introductory part. For most people, your wealth is in your home. And it's really incumbent on us as elected officials and government officials to ensure that we are maintaining the quality of life for folks, but maintaining that value for them. And you just look at it almost from a business perspective. And the business perspective is simply this. People have invested in the town, whether they were born and raised there or they moved there recently. but they've invested in the town and their wealth is tied to their house. So if we go ahead and we start to downzone where it's inappropriate, that's going to affect folks. And if we don't enforce the building and zoning codes where people just come in and willy-nilly are converting houses, that's going to affect the value of their property. And I'm very proud of our efforts. You'll see some of the slides as we go forward. The year before I became town supervisor, we had issued 700 violations across the entire town. Last year, 700 violations with about a dozen or so going into justice court. Where last year we had over 1,800 violations that we issued with several hundred into justice court. And you go into justice court when you fail to do what you're supposed to do. And we don't let those violations go. They can be everything from property maintenance to illegal conversions, and we've dealt with hundreds of those illegal conversions. And the difficulty that we had, and I'll finish with this, the difficulty that we've had is that because our town didn't enforce the code for so many years, where there was, I hate to say it, selective enforcement, we would actually be dealing with situations where we made it easier for people to report the violation or the issue, and then we would find that, you know, this has been something that's been going on 10, 20, 25 years. It doesn't matter. If you're breaking the law, you're violating the law, you're not keeping your house safe for first responders that may have to go in, you're getting extra services that you're not paying for through your taxes, through the sewer district, you know, through the solid waste authority, which is taxing everybody else, you know, a hidden tax. And ultimately you are degrading the property values of everybody else around you. And I don't care if it's, you know, you've been doing it for 10 years or 20 years. It's not acceptable. It shouldn't have been acceptable back then, but it's not acceptable now. So that's kind of by way of an overview. We're going to run through a bunch of slides. I'm going to have Leslie do a good bit of the talking as well. She, you know, and again, what we're talking about is scalable from a village to a town. You don't have to, like we went, you know, full bore into it, but you can work through the parameters of what you have in place with some reprioritization. We kicked up our fines as well. You have the ability to do that, which you can also pay for. And Leslie can kind of get into some of the details there. She'll also talk about just training the code enforcement officers, like with the eye towards when you go to write a violation, from the moment you engage or you are engaged, start thinking about the court case that you're going to be building, so that you can get the zoning, you know, the zoning to hold up in court. And Leslie will kind of go through some of that as well, and the training that we've done with our code enforcement officers that she brought to bear. Again, because we brought in a career criminal prosecutor who knows how to try a case in court. You don't necessarily have to do that. You can rely on others to kind of help you with that, and we'll certainly help you with resources that we've been able to tap into. But that's kind of the focus that we went on. And as I said, in Clarkstown and Rockland County, we're being held up as the standard of, you know, folks that are doing it right. And I'm very proud of the efforts that we've kind of achieved on that. So I'm going to run through a bunch of slides, and then I'll turn it over to Leslie as well, and then we'll happy to take some questions as well. So that's me, after our town seal, which is, I kind of laugh at it because Clarkstown hasn't looked like that in probably 70 years. And you know, the Tappan Zee Bridge is off on the little side, if you see over there, because Clarkstown is the center of Rockland County. As I said, 88,000 people, but we actually have a little piece of the, you know, the front of the Hudson River. So just keep looking. So what we're going to talk about is housing and zoning enforcement. And again, this is kind of a version of what we did 2 years ago, roughly? Yeah, about 2 years ago. Gordon Wren was still the Commissioner of Fire and Emergency Services in Rockland County. I had worked closely with Gordon when I became town supervisor about how we could really step up our enforcement efforts. And Gordon saw how effective that was and asked us to do a training for all of the building and zoning code enforcement officers and all the other municipalities in Rockland at the Fire Training Center. And we took this is a version of what we did back then, about 2 years ago, updated with some additional details and some additional information. So protecting our quality of life, it kind of gave you the overview, but what we did was we called it the Code Compliance Unit. So we were able to reprioritize within our own budget. We didn't expand, you know, the budget, you know, overall. In fact, I'll tell you that we were able to keep taxes flat over my first 4 years. We even had the first ever tax cut that we were able to do in our town because we were able to do some restructuring and we moved some things around. So we reprioritized a bunch of those deputy town attorneys that we got rid of that probably never should have been there in the first place. We took some of that money and we put it in, and we hired 3 additional code enforcement officers, so we had 4. We created the code compliance unit. We have Leslie, kind of leading the efforts in the town attorney's office. We actually have Leslie, Paul Schofield, and our town attorney. So we have three full-time attorneys, and Leslie leads the effort with the code compliance unit and with prosecutions and justice court. The other thing that we did is, and you'll get a little bit about it, we brought in the 311 system. We made it a lot easier, and it's not expensive, and I'm happy to give the information on it, a few $1,000s. It's a 311 system that people can actually go onto our website, and they can report a violation, an issue. It can be anything from a pothole to illegal housing to another concern. It can then actually, it gets routed directly to the different town departments that might be impacted on it, and people can actually follow up in terms of what the violation is. So we searched high and low for that, and we found that information. So we brought in 311, so that was really important. And we also did a lot of education. One of the things I do, I'm the only supervisor in Rockland County that actually does this. We actually do teletown hall meetings. Very inexpensive. Great way to public outreach. It keeps you on your toes. I just had one on Monday night where we call all the residents. We do it about 7 or 8 times a year. We have 1 hour where we basically, this is Supervisor Hoehmann, thank you for joining us. I give like a 10-minute intro, and then I just take questions for 50 minutes. That teletown hall meeting, at a regular town board meeting, we'll get a handful of people unless there's something really controversial. On a teletown hall meeting, we'll touch into 6,000 people that will actually get on the call for at least a couple of minutes, and we'll average, anywhere from 200 to 700 per minute on the call. It's a tremendous way to inform your residents. We do it with a company out of Texas. It costs us like $400 each time we do it. It's like nominal. Budget a couple of $1,000s. It's a great way that you can communicate with your residents a couple of times a year if you just want to do it quarterly or whatever else, but the way in which we were able to push information out. We could also talk about what are the issues, what are the problems, tell us what's going on. Here's how you can report these things. So, really the 311 and kind of the public outreach kind of helped us, and people really responded in terms of reporting issues, and which then you have to do your job and follow up with them. So that's all part of educating the public. Here's the comparison and the statistic for us. So I became supervisor in 2016. So my predecessor was a little over 700 violations that were issued townwide. 30 maybe went into, it was a couple of dozen that ended up going into justice court. Just nothing was being done, and it was kind of selective enforcement. Give you a case in point. Really stark example. On Route 9W in our town, we have a kind of an industrial corridor, and we have some condominiums, and it's a state roadway. And kind of down off of 9W, down the hill, there's an easement, there's a lot of trees, and there was a gentleman who had a commercial building. And he initially built this building a number of years ago, and he started to actually do work on it illegally, just figuring I'm going to get away with it. And the town, kind of beat him up a little bit, but ultimately he built this building. So he decides he needs to expand his building. He's directly across from a condo complex with several hundred condominiums or townhomes. And the folks are complaining because he didn't go before the planning board. And this was a couple of months. It was the fall that I was running for supervisor against the former supervisor. And the people were complaining and nothing was happening with the town. The guy actually clear-cut about 400 trees and started to dig down a hillside that he encroached on an environmental easement. So when I became town supervisor in January, within the first 2 weeks I had residents calling me and saying, why isn't the town doing anything about this? I didn't even know, like, whatever. So I told our building inspector at the time, what are we going to do here? And he's like, oh, we'll go talk to him. I said, no, what are we going to do? We can't have this. So it was a different mindset that I brought in from the jump. And ultimately what happened was, they went out, they issued him a violation, the guy just ignored it, because that was business as usual in our town. So he ignored it after 10 days, and then went back to our building inspector and said, no, what are we going to do about this? And he's like, oh, you want us to do something? He's like, no, yeah, we're going to do something about this. So we issued, we brought him into court. And the guy wasn't really cooperating or whatever else, and Leslie wasn't on staff yet. So I went to my town attorney, who was new at the time, and I said, get an injunction. What can we do? He said, well, we could. I said, no, what's the most radical thing we can do? He said, we can go into state Supreme Court and we can get an injunction. Do it. So we went into state Supreme Court. We got a TRO, an injunction, stopped him from moving forward, and the Supreme Court judge actually told this guy's attorney, who was like dumbfounded that, this isn't how things have been done here. The state Supreme Court judge told his attorney, said, I'm issuing this order, please tell your client that if he violates it, to come to court with his toothbrush because I'm putting him in jail. And it stopped. And what happened was, he had to go back to the planning, he had to go to the planning board, he stopped his construction, he went to the planning board, went through the zoning process. It took him about 6 months to do everything he needed to do to get before the board. He ultimately was able to build. We adjudicated it through court at the time. It came to a settlement. He paid over $30,000 in fines, and he had to replant several hundred trees, and he got to build his building. We got the rateable. The residents, most of them, just about all of them were happy. One wasn't, because they felt he shouldn't be able to build. But he had the right to build, just the way in which he went about it. He couldn't build it as big as he wanted to, but we used the court system to do that. That's a mindset. It didn't cost us a lot of money. I had the attorney on staff. It cost him money, and it cost him a big fine, and it cost him the whole public process, and probably $100,000 to pay his engineers and everybody else, which he should have done from the get-go. And again, that's the power that we have, and that's the power that you can do from a village to a town to a county. That's the power and the ability that we have, just using the resources that we have. So anyway, that was one of the first situations we dealt with. And Leslie came in shortly thereafter, and we put a lot of other structures in. So we were up almost 1,200 violations. Keep in mind, we didn't start the program until, really get it underway until May, June of 2016. So we issued over 1,100 violations that year, so there's a significant uptick. 2017, it climbed up again. 2018, over 1,600. Well over 1,600. This year, we're probably going to issue 2,000 violations in the town of Clarkstown. And you can see from the court cases, 200 roughly, or so each year. Just sizable numbers that are going in. And you only go into court in our town. You only go into court in our town if you're not going to resolve the matter. And Leslie can kind of go through. They get a notice. They have 10 days, to be able to respond. We watch them. We'll hit them with multiple violations. Leslie can kind of go through all of that. But the numbers speak for themselves. So, receiving complaints, confirming information, investigation, compliance methods, resolutions. We also, one of the other things we did in 2016, we created a rental registry. Very, very important. I would urge you all to do that if you haven't. You create a rental registry. You can charge a fee. If anybody has a single family, or two-family house within our town, they have to register with our rental registry. What does that do? It enables us to be able to send our building inspector and our code enforcement officer to make sure, number one, it's in compliance, and number two, that they haven't violated their site plan or their CUPON. And we are continuing to build a rental registry, and we get to go in every 3 years to be able to re-inspect the properties. And what you'll find is, and Leslie can speak about this, some of our worst offenders are people that have illegally converted. We've actually had repeat offenders now, and we put kickers now in terms of our prosecution and the way in which Leslie prosecutes these cases, where if you re-violate within a period of time, the old case reopens and we are able to hit them for the initial fine again, plus a stepped-up fine the second time, and ultimately, if it goes far enough, we could eventually try and take their house to the county. And you have to put teeth into it. The rental registry has buttressed what we've been able to do because we've been able to find a lot of illegal apartments. The other thing that's done is we're doing some education outreach with the major real estate people within our town, the realtors, because what we're finding within the real estate community, there's loads of realtors that won't question, they won't do their homework as they're renting out a house or trying to sell a house, and they'll say mother-daughter, great apartment. And a lot of these things are illegal. And what we're doing is now the outreach to the realtors to say you have to make sure that it's actually legal what you're advertising, because you're going to jeopardize potentially your license as a realtor, and it's also going to help us clean up some of the violations that have been out there for a long period of time. So we got complaints following telephone, email, letter to the building department, supervisor's office, other municipal offices. As I said, we do a lot of public outreach, those teletown hall meetings. I do coffees with the supervisor 6 times a year out in different Saturday or Sunday mornings in bagel and coffee shops, and to meet the folks. You'd be amazed at the number of folks that show up at those things who they don't want to pick up a phone and call an office. They're not sure what, but they'll come meet you, over a cup of coffee, and they'll tell you, every problem that's out there that they want you to address. So a lot of public outreach. We've done an awful lot, with this. And through the 311 system, it's a residence portal on our town website. 311, the company is called Acela. The program is called Public Stuff. Very reasonable. The annual cost to us, because we did every department, all the bells and whistles, is about $14,000. You can do it incrementally cheaper. And you can scale it, obviously, given the number of users and the size of your budget as well and your government. But for a big town like us, $14,700 is not a lot, and it gives us tremendous coverage and the ability for residents to see our feedback or our follow-up, to provide feedback, and to make it easily across every department within the town. So great system. There's a lot like it. That's what we happen to use. And then we get from other sources and from other services. So the post office, have conversations with your postmasters, as they're starting to see stuff popping up, because they're going to be some of the first people to see. Delivery companies, they might see stuff that just doesn't make sense, UPS and FedEx. And really what we're doing a lot of too is communication with our fire departments. They respond to a false alarm, they respond to an issue in a house, and they know it's not right. They know it's been illegally cut up. They'll have conversations with us, and it'll bring the information in. And obviously with our police departments, is our police now, they didn't do it before this new, and by the way, none of this happened before we kind of said this is what we were going to do, but you could easily do it. It's not going to cost you additional resources, it's just conversations. And making sure your staff are going to be looking for this, and that they're talking with these outside entities that are going to encounter these situations where they can provide the information. So police, EMS, ambulance corps. We're all volunteer ambulance corps, down in our town. There's about 5 of them, and so we have conversations with them as well. And people are great about it now. They really want to bring that information forward, because they know that when their ships are down, and if there's a fire or an incident in one of those buildings that they're going to have to go into, they're not safe if the building is cut up in a way that it's not supposed to be cut up. And so they're kind of taking care of their own safety by reporting it to us. And then in Rockland County, we have the Codes Initiative, which frankly, they buttress what we do, but I think we're far ahead of what they're doing. But the Code Initiative, the Health Department, or Social Services can get involved with some of the referrals. But those are all ways in which you're kind of getting some information on illegal conversions and things of that nature. So, confirming the information, Leslie, why don't I kick it to you to kind of jump into how you train and kind of what we're going to do. I'm going to turn it to Leslie just so she can kind of go through how she's trained folks and how we're starting with the eye towards the moment we're engaging with people on a situation like this, that we want to get the situation rectified, but we're starting from the ground floor at how am I building a case for Justice Court or for State Supreme Court to correct the situation, and in the worst case, if they don't correct it, I have to make sure that I'm doing everything so that I have an easy case to prosecute, to get the fines, and to get the problem corrected. So, Leslie, go ahead.
Hi, everyone.
I'll move it for you.
Okay. So, like Supervisor Hoehmann said, he brought me in to really take charge of enforcing the zoning codes and building codes within the town of Clarkstown. And it was, I think, it's really changing the culture. So it's changing the culture of both all the citizens in Clarkstown, as well as our building department. Because the building department, they never had such a hands-on attorney working so closely with them. So I think at first they were all like, why are you constantly down in the building department? So it's really changing the culture. So that being said, when they got a complaint, I follow up with them. We talk daily. I talk with the building inspector, the deputy building inspector, all the code enforcement officers, as much as I really can. And when a complaint comes in, I kind of just really, well, what is the complaint? Is it landscaping maintenance? Is it property maintenance? Is it someone complaining about an illegal house? I mean, we prioritize, obviously, in my mind, an illegal conversion of a single-family house is more important than the grass being more than 10 inches. So in order to have a proper prosecution, I had to really kind of train everybody what to do. So what are they looking for? Just because a neighbor's calling and saying there's 3 families living there, that's all very well and good. You can't just write up, in the past, they would just write up a violation, send it to, they thought the owner on record, and then bring him into court. But you don't really have a viable prosecution, speaking from as an attorney's perspective. You have no proof, you have no evidence, you have nothing. Basically, you have a neighbor saying 3 people, 3 families live there. So what I've kind of had to tell everybody, just forget everything what you did in the past. This is what you have to do. So go out, find out who the real owner of the house is. And there's a number of ways you can do that. The tax records, who's on the tax record. But you could also go into your local county court. I mean, Rockland County has it right online. Plug in the address of the location or what you think is the last name. Pull the deed, and usually the way it's recorded in Rockland is the last page of the recording usually has the person's name and address. So if it's a different address than the one that's on the tax bill, now you send the violation to that person. You send it both. We send it to both places. So you send it to that person and you send it to the other person. You also need to go knock on the door, take pictures of all the cars, take pictures of the license plates, take pictures of how many gas meters, electric meters, knock on the door, speak to neighbors, knock on the door and try and get a name. That's one way. And ask the person, is anybody else living there? Are there any, take pictures of the house, are there air conditionings in the basement or the attic? Check your building records, is it a 1-family or a 2-family? These are just all things that a picture's worth 1,000 words. So when you go in and you see, on 2 doors, door A and door B, take photographs. I mean, it sounds so basic, but nobody actually thought to do this. So once you do that and you have enough information that you feel that you can write a violation, notice a violation, it gets sent out both, obviously, certified mail and regular mail. And I don't know, you have to put a day, in a specific day. You can't just say cure immediately, that's just case law. And in the past, the building department or the code enforcement officers would never go back to check to see if the violation was corrected. Because if you're giving somebody 10 days to correct it, maybe it is corrected in 10 days, then there's no reason to go back to court. So all these things, and I also had to train them to go back. You have to follow through. You can't just leave it in a drawer, go back 10 days later, knock on the door, take pictures, see what, if anything, has been corrected. Now, a lot of times you can't necessarily get in, but if you, which I know the supervisor alluded to, search warrant. So if a tenant wasn't allowing somebody in, I started writing search warrants. And again, it's just gathering evidence. So that's really, that's the key. You just have to gather as much possible evidence as you can. So again, I just gave a slew of some examples of, but you have to obviously get all the building department records. What is the certificate of occupancy for? Is it a single family house? But again, go instruct whoever's your eyes and ears, your enforcement, your building department. Take pictures of every door, take pictures of every air conditioning, every gas meter, every mailbox. People they don't realize how much evidence is actually just in plain view from the street. Something else I started to do, and I tend to be like kind of proactive. So when I first started, I signed up to all these real estate websites like Trulia, Hotpads, Zillow. I get about 20 emails every single day, and I just plugged in rentals within whatever the zip code was for Clarkstown, and you'd be surprised how dumb people are. They're like, 1 bedroom, 1 bath, single family home, inside a single family home, small pets allowed, print it out, give it to the building department. That's another piece of evidence that you can add to a search warrant. Or, you know, knock, knock, knock. I know you have one. What's that? And now they actually got smart, because now instead of putting the address, they'll put on a corner of, I had one the other day, corner of Dover Road and Water's Edge. So I clicked on the little map icon. It showed me exactly what house it was. So I was like, oh, 92 Water's Edge, here you go. So it's, people are just not, they just don't think that it's not, it's very easy to, with a little effort, it's fairly easy to figure out how, you know, who's converting their houses. The other thing is, I mean, residents in our town are our eyes and ears. I mean, you know how many times I've gotten calls, there's 5 taxis dropping off kids every single morning, back and forth, back and forth. That's a clue. That's more likely than not, it could be a rental. Call your school districts. Once you have a case in justice court, you can do a subpoena for school records, get attendance records for anybody who's registered from this address for the past 5 years. Go to your board of elections, that you have a freedom of information law. Foil it. Who is registered to vote at this address? You'll be surprised, you'll get 10 names with different last names. Again, you get the O&R bills, you can get the cable bills. I've used all these different techniques. Once I have a case in justice court, I can gather a lot of evidence to prosecute. And it's changing the culture. I mean, I think the supervisor alluded to this. I mean, prior to me starting, the town would often give what's called a civil compromise, which is like no admission of guilt or anything, and you pay like a small $100 fine or fee in lieu of a prosecution to the town. So I've really changed the culture, and I think I worked in Brooklyn my entire career, so although there were nobody knew me in Clarkstown. I lived there, but I didn't know any of the attorneys. I think they were really shell-shocked that I took such a hard stand. Like, no, you have to plead to the charge with what's called a conditional discharge, and the conditions being that you maintain your home as a single-family home, you allow the building department to go in and do an inspection within the time frame of the conditional discharge, and you have to pay a fine of $1,500. And I was really not negotiable. So I think I probably didn't make a lot of friends, but 3 years later, the attorneys are like, okay, you got caught, let's just cut it, you know, maybe I can get $250 off if you just fix it immediately. So it really is changing the culture and training your building departments, the assessor's office. That's the other thing, nothing ever happened, or I don't believe, our own departments within our building didn't talk. So when you would take out a building permit for a second kitchen, the assessor's office would come in and get all the building department applications. They'd go out, because now they do an assessment, okay, now we can raise your taxes for 2 kitchens, but then they'd go out and go to the home and do an inspection, but never tell the building department there's 2 families living there. So that's completely, yes?
I have a question, just to turn back. So when you were first elected, you had gotten just under 1,200, and then you got 1,200, and now you're at 18, and you say this year you're expecting over 2,000. And when you mentioned the culture change, I would think what would happen is people would say, uh-oh, not in this town, let's leave.
Yes.
In fact, you're still uncovering under the rocks all these problems. Do you think that's what it is, or is it just, like, what's the culture change if it
Why haven't the violations gone down?
I have the same question.
Great question, because we're, in terms of illegal housing violations, illegal conversions, I think those are going down. I think ultimately, you know, people are just more likely, we're getting property maintenance stuff, they're not cutting the grass, you know, that type of stuff. So that 2,000 is everything. It's from grass is more than 10 inches tall to properties illegally converted. In terms of those violations numbers not going down, we've added more staff, and they're continuing to do the follow-up work. The other thing that we're doing is we're doing historically, if you haven't done this, you're going to have 10, 20, 30 years of people just illegally converted. And it's just out there, and it's kind of like that underground that you're not aware of. You're not getting the extra tax revenue for it. Everybody else is paying more for the sewer, everybody else is paying more for solid waste, in Rockland County, and, in our town, to bear that burden, because of the extra people that are living in those homes. So we're discovering more and more of it, but unfortunately some of this stuff, and Leslie will tell you, I can't tell you how many of these folks that have come in and like, what are you talking about? We've been doing this for 20 years. Well, I'm sorry, you shouldn't have been doing it for 20 years, and you got to fix it now. So I do expect those numbers are probably going to drop, over time. But I also think that we've done such a good bit of public outreach and education. It's common knowledge now. I mean, Sarah Wallace, actually from NBC, actually is going to do a story on Clarkstown, just on what we've done, because they're impressed with how this has been done, and the other municipalities down there are kind of talking about, gee, maybe we should start doing what you guys are doing, because we've seen a real improvement. And in fact, I can tell you, right on the Ramapo border in Clarkstown, off of West Clarkstown Road, we've had a number of folks that moved in, bought houses, started to legally convert them. And then I joke because, Leslie's got a, very bright smile, she's very pleasant, affable person, but get her in court, she's a pit bull, like her. And don't let that smile fool you. And my code enforcement officers, they've taken to it, they're inquisitive, with a smile, you'd be amazed. One of my code enforcement officers, one of those houses, remember, he was within his first year working with us, Ray Francis, and Ray went out and there's a contractor there, guy lets him in the house. Hi, hey, how you doing? He identified him from the town, the guy lets him in. Ray's walking through, I see they're putting up walls, the garage, is being illegally converted. Oh, great. Boom, goes back, talks to Leslie. We hit him with a violation. And you'd be surprised at how often people just rat themselves out or what have you. In that situation, in that area, that became a flip. That was going to be illegal houses. It became, ultimately, we had like 4 houses in that immediate area that several of them got reconverted back. They went back in the market, they were sold as upgraded single-family homes, and they're single-family homes as far as we know today with new owners. So that's where this is successful. If we didn't have this in place, that would just continue to be a neighborhood with illegally converted single-family homes. There's a CUPON group that started down in that neighborhood, and we're working with those folks, and they've helped us to identify like 11 other homes, out of several hundred. That are in that general neighborhood. It's more of a working class area, and a number of those we've checked out. Some of them have illegal conversions, some of them don't. People think what they think is illegal is not illegal, but we've been able to identify others, and a bunch of those are long-standing. They've been that way for years, and we're stopping it. So that's part of the reason why I think the numbers aren't going down as much. It's also people are just reporting a lot more. And it's keeping us busy.
That's great.
Yeah, I have a question. If you are in a town where they are not as motivated as you are, and the residents are complaining and the enforcement doesn't get done, what can residents do? Is there anything that they can do, or are we at the mercy of the town and the code enforcement people who don't enforce the codes, despite how many times residents complain?
I think, well, I'll give you, the overall answer is you need an administration and elected officials that are going to be open to a willing citizen. But if you don't have that, I think what you can do is, and Leslie could maybe speak more to this, you can, within the limits as a citizen or citizen group, you can try and get your own information and then submit it to the town and document it, because then the town legally gets put on notice, or the village, whatever.
But it's been done and in writing, and it's
So
still
I
ignored.
think you could actually sue the town. You can
Yeah,
take it
if you
to
build enough of a case, enough of a case, and you get dozens of instances where they're not enforcing their code, then what you can do is, and clear documentation. And what we're doing, you can do as a resident. So you can, it's going to be more time consuming, you can do freedom of information requests, you can go to your county clerk's office, you can get the who owns the house, and you can foil to get information as to C of Os and what's it zoned for, and get all that and put it together. And then you could, get circumstantial evidence just from driving by and taking pictures and what have you. And that can be enough of a case where if you build enough of it and you show a pattern, then you could send that to other law enforcement agencies. You can go to the Department of State for New York State. If realtors are involved and you're seeing the same realtors involved, you can make complaints to the Department of State about the realtors, and you can make complaints to New York State as well through the Department of State about the municipality not doing what they need to do. So there are things that would be a lot more time consuming. You'd have to build a bit of a case. Unfortunately, since you don't have the ability that we have to do subpoenas and go into justice court, if you're dealing with a municipality that's just going to totally look the other way, that's what you could do is kind of build a case and then try and bring it forward to other people on oversight.
Can we do this without an attorney?
I mean, if you're going to bring a case in court to Supreme Court, I mean, you would have to know how to file the papers, but yeah, anybody could bring a case.
It's in Article 78.
Right.
You can do that. It costs a little money, but if you get a small grassroots organization together, you can do that. You can also get a petition together. You can even give it to county DA.
Right.
And say they are violating the oath of their office because they're not upholding
That's
the
correct.
oath. You can also go for removal of that, use the mechanism of the state to remove those who are not performing their due justice.
I mean, it's not, I wouldn't say that it's going to be easy by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, I would call every radio newspaper also, but make sure you have all your documents. And because you know what, I couldn't imagine any town supervisor or mayor or building inspector, you're in your face. Here's the CO, here's this, here's that. You know what?
There's enough of them around.
Okay,
But
well,
the 3,000, 4,000 signatures is good.
I mean, it won't be easy, but
No.
you can definitely do it.
In public service and elected officials, a lot of folks are going to be about just risk aversion. They want to make sure that they're doing their job, and they should be about protecting their municipality and upholding the law. But ultimately, risk aversion from a political perspective is, what am I going to do to limit liability for me for ultimately, re-election? So if some are making that mental calculation, if you have enough damning evidence, and you're going to have Sarah Wallace knocking on your door in a municipality, or you're going to have Tony Aiello or whoever the reporter is, they might say, you know what, I got to deal with this. I got to address these issues. Hopefully, people come to it on their own, but it's not going to be easy. But you put the information together and work it, and hopefully, in the end, selfish reasons, they'll say, okay, I've got to address these issues. Yes.
I just had a quick question. So just going back to your initial statement where you talked about that you revisited the zoning, and that part of the modifications that were made was, you identified residential areas that were residential, and you took out the areas of like houses of worship. In our situation, let's say for example, there is already a situation where a residential home was converted to a house of worship. How do we step out of that?
Yeah, unfortunately, everybody's familiar with the Orangetown Bradley Corporate Park case, where it's like 25, 30 years ago, and the town of Orangetown paid out like $8 million because they tried to pull back C of O and building permits after they got their approvals and moved forward. If it's something that's previously approved, you can't touch it, as long as it's done legally. But what we can do is we made a case where that type of use, that type of intensive use, and I just don't want to focus on houses of worship because it was broad-based. We took any intensive use, including houses of worship, certain types of applications that would be bordering on commercial in nature, like multifamily that you can petition for, schools, and special district type properties. And we pulled those all out of residential zones unless they were on a state or a county road, and they had to be a specific residential zone. So in our town, R160, like the two and the four, R80 and R160 are really more like conservation zones. So there's larger properties, and so we don't allow a lot of intensive uses, but we did allow more intensive uses in the R10, the R20, R10, R15, R22, and even in some of the R40s. We took that all out if you're not on a state or a county road. Now, I will tell you, we're being sued over it now. We have the whole Lupa case with, but we're confident that we're confident that the Lupa case is not going to. I don't want to put any friction. I know it wasn't, but don't talk about that. We're confident that we'll sustain that challenge.
So just as a follow-up question, so if you were talking about a number of different regions, so if one region it was approved for, if we can identify other regions that maybe are a little different than that region, we can still set up for those other regions where it's not.
Right.
So,
But be careful though. You want to make sure that whatever you're doing is
right.
neutral across the board, everything. And you also want to make sure that it's somehow tied into your comprehensive plan. And if your comprehensive plan is really old, you probably need to do some type of update. And we're due now for our comprehensive plan update. We're going to be working on that next year. It's 10 years, so we're going to be doing an update on it. But we did enough of the basic analysis on these particular uses where we're confident on that going forward. But yeah, you can. And the other thing is, development comes across as like a bad, like it's a four-letter word. What we're talking about is irresponsible development. A lot of people say overdevelopment. And look, I lived very briefly for like a year up here in Orange County in Washington. Shortly after my wife and I got married. And Orange County is dramatically different from what I remember. My brother-in-law still lives in Washingtonville, over on Waterford Circle. And so I remember when he built this house, we moved up from the city in 1994. It was a brand new neighborhood. And I'm amazed every time I come up here at holidays to see how much more is here. Like, I forgot, I didn't even know that when this place was built. So there's some appropriate development that's taking place across Orange County, and it's going to continue to happen just like in Rockland County and Park County. What we're fighting against is the irresponsible development. It's people that are buying houses that are going to illegally convert them, or folks that are just going to decide that, you know what, I'm going to come into this area and I'm going to do what I want. And if you put the mechanisms in place that we've done, there are people that are saying, I'm not going there. I've had developers say, oh, your town's too tough. It's going to take me 2 years to get approved, and I can just go, here or there, and it's going to work for me. So it's no longer the cost of doing business in Clarkstown, and it's going to take you some time to get to that point. So irresponsible development is what we're working against. But the other piece of what I was trying to get to is some types of uses, they're going to be allowed. So you're going to have to allow them in designated areas. Do that work. Some of that's going to be difficult for you to do, but allow those uses where they're appropriate. And it doesn't matter if you're black, white, Asian, Latino, Roman Catholic, Jewish, Protestant, a Martian. It doesn't matter. If it's equal for everybody, and if it's allowed here in this zone, and this is why, and you have a rationale behind it, you're going to do well, defending it in a court case. And more importantly, you're going to protect the integrity of your town and your zoning code, and your residents ultimately are going to be happy with it.
Can I suggest that we let you finish your presentation?
Sure.
Without,
Just one
before I get the question, I've enjoyed the presentation. I'd like the questions to maybe after.
Sure. Why don't we grab this one, and then we'll jump right into it.
I'll save the question and just one quick comment and I think it was somebody right behind me with regard to citizens getting action from their local government. The past 2-3 years, social media has been a big platform for that. It's been huge in our community, and it's a very useful tool.
No, absolutely, that's part of it.
So
We'll move forward. You can talk about.
I think that I probably covered a lot of what was on the slides, but we could just run through the slides quickly. So I just, again, it really is the eyes and ears of the community. And like the supervisor said, he started these great programs where you really have to educate the residents and make them feel comfortable that they can report whatever they see, even if it's not founded. Because believe me, trust me, we all get hundreds of calls, and the building department will go out and say, there's nothing there, it's all good. So that's fine, but you have to educate the residents that if they see something, they should say something. And our building department, I think we have a terrific building department, that they are so responsive. But again, I think that it's in the past 3 years that they really know that this is a priority. And the building inspector, who was not the building inspector when I started, he and I work terrific. And if I call him and I say, can you send somebody here, they go out within 24 hours. And we have tremendous amount of communication. The goal obviously is compliance. We want everybody to be compliant with all our building and town codes. So I'm not looking to take people into court, I'm not looking to take people's money, we just want compliance. That's the ultimate goal. And I think to your point where you said, how come things, the numbers haven't gone down, I think because our building department, more people are reporting or complaining, or however you want to say it, and our building department is going out and seeing violations, so they're issuing the violations. But I also think that many of the residents are now realizing, I don't want to end up in justice court, tell me how I can comply. And so they'll call the building department, the building inspector, one of the code enforcement officers, or they'll reach out to me and say, I just got this, I just want to make it right, tell me what to do, I don't want to go to court. Or they'll hire a lawyer, and the lawyer will call me and say, okay, I'm emailing you the notice of eviction paper, please don't, and they have full access to the house. So I think our violations have gone up, but the court cases have come down because I think the residents really, at this point, hopefully the word is out there that we're not playing games. You're going to end up in court and the fines are going to be substantial. So I think that's, so I think...
And I think the last two slides are basically, you have a lot of information within your own town just by having departments talk to each other where you can kind of build the case. In the case where you have somebody that's totally obstinate, and variances, go back and look at your variances, see if they applied for a variance, maybe they did, maybe they didn't get it approved and they did it anyway, nobody did the follow-up. So those are the types of things, go back on your records and everything else. But if you get to the point where somebody's totally obstinate, search warrants. And you have the ability to do this, and this is something Leslie brought in the process.
It's part of the thing, I think everybody...
It's part of the packet, but she can run through it. So administrative search warrants, just
right, so any municipality has the ability to write an administrative search warrant, and so as we just go through, so it's either you obviously need somebody swearing out the search warrant, so in our case, a lot of times it's the building inspector or the code enforcement officer, and again, we always require our local police department to accompany somebody from our building department to go on the search warrant. So we coordinate with our local police department. I don't want my building inspectors or code enforcement officers to go into a home where I have no idea if the home is safe or not safe. They're obviously not armed, they're not police officers. So our police department is terrific. And again, warrants, and again, case law explains how it should be done, and there's a sample in the packet, but it has to be very specific, obviously, what you're looking for, whether it's the inside, the outside, the basement, the upstairs, the attic, the entire house, and what we're there really just to take pictures. So we just want to see, is it, well, more likely than not, I already know it's been converted based on all the evidence, but submitted with that, I always make a packet with exhibits, and if we could just go through, that's just an application, it's a sample application to a search warrant, it's like standard language that you could use, any municipality can use.
You can do it in village court, justice court,
And ours, we have 4 town justices, they've been very good about me running over and asking.
But that was an education process too, and I can tell you, the judges had to get on board initially because it was like, oh, this is a different mindset, and because cases like this weren't coming in to justice court. They're great, they all work with us, but that was an education process that we had to do, not just with our staff, but with the town justices, because they're an independent branch, but they had to get used to, okay, we want search warrants, and oh, by the way, Judge, this is no longer going to be a civil compromise. If we're going to seek the maximum, and we're also changing the penalty structure, and the fines. And the judges have really gotten on board with that. And they also run for office, so it becomes a balancing act. And we actually had one instance, Leslie was prosecuting a case, one lady who had been somewhat politically involved with some property maintenance issues. I won't go any further. Her neighbors complained and whatever else, and because she had connections to all 4 town justices, Leslie actually had to try it in Orangetown, the adjoining town. And you'll have some instances like that, but for the most part, our justices, town justices have gotten on board and it's worked out well, especially with the search warrants. The first time Leslie went in, they were like, what are you doing? But they're used to it, and as I said, we've executed over 3 dozen in just over 2 years.
So that's just a sample of, one of,
It's in your packet.
right. Well, if anybody happens to do a search warrant, you have to return the evidence to the court. So I've included, that was the previous slide, which you have,
Sure.
just a summary of how many pictures. Generally, the way our justice court does it, they want me to hold the evidence, but I just submit something. I submit something to the court saying this is the evidence that was seized or the property that was seized. It's really just the photographs, and I give them a copy of what the photographs, so they can put it in their court file. So here's just a bunch of examples of what exhibits I would attach in my search warrant application. Just the deed, the certificate of occupancy. I mean, it's self-explanatory, you can read it. Again, advertisements for rentals. The code enforcement officers, again, like I said, is all training, go out, take pictures, speak to somebody. A lot of times, this is another great tool that I've gotten cases from. You work with the local justice court, people file for eviction notices or for failure to pay rent or anything like that. I've asked if, again, it's all public record because it's a filed document, and if anything looks suspicious or if somebody's being evicted, and they'll let me know the address, and I'll look it up and say, oh, it's a 1-family house, or a 2-family house, or it's a rental, and that's another way that the town can just gather evidence to make sure our codes are complied with. So that's just another way. So a lot of times a tenant might be taking the landlord to court because they're not getting their security deposit back, or for whatever reason, they're so cooperative. They're more than willing to come in at any time and sign with a corroborating affidavit, so I could either bring a case to justice court or help me write a search warrant. So obviously the deed, and this is, I think that is the whole, keep going. Okay, so just our property card, our building department keeps a property card on every property in the town of Clarkstown. Again, you can see in this particular one, going back 2009, a legal apartment, a legal apartment, a legal apartment. It's just something else that a judge could look at as part of an exhibit. So I usually try and include that as well.
Notice is nothing after 15.
Again, you can see 85 4B. That's a clue. This is a single-family house. So why is there a door that says 4B? And it's the same. I think the next picture might have number 6. This is one that had 6 apartments. It was like a little dead-end road, so you would never think, but the neighbor complained. 3 mailboxes. Doorbells, 1, 2, and 3. It's just, these are all, when you, as I'm thinking, the power of a picture, you attach it as an exhibit, the judges are more than happy to sign. Again, the police department, if they are being called for a landlord-tenant dispute or resident-resident dispute, we've now gotten them, changed the culture in the town, they'll pick up the phone and call the building department. I just responded over the weekend, it looked like there was a bunch of rooms, single,
SROs.
thank you, in this house. So you can use your police department records, attach it to a search warrant application. I guess that's an affidavit of somebody who...
Yeah, so that's an affidavit from...
That was a tenant who was very happy to cooperate with the town.
And that was actually, that's one of our paralegals in the, we have one paralegal in the town attorney's office, that's a paralegal who took the affidavit or signed off on it.
Oh, okay, so like I was saying, you can use the power of the internet as well. 2-bedroom, 1 bath. So in this house is like a 4,000 square foot house. So when I see, I happen to live near there, so that's why I know the area. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, that's not no. I know that that's not a 2-bedroom, 1 bath house.
And that's a single family neighborhood, R22 or R40?
R22, I think. And the other thing is, a lot of houses, a very quick story, so on the end of my block, there's a house for sale. And I was like, ooh, I was just curious, let me look it up and see what it's going for, just out of curiosity. So I'm looking through the pictures, I'm like, 2 kitchens, they have 2 kitchens in this house? So I called the building department, they have no idea that I did this, but I called the building department and I'm like, do they have a CO for a second kitchen? No. I said, well, guess what? Violation. So we made them take out the second kitchen. You can have, obviously legally, you can have 2 kitchens in, what? You can have 2 kitchens, and you can't tell somebody they can't have 2 kitchens, but you can make them get a certificate of occupancy for a second kitchen. And I think in this particular case, they were just like, forget it, we'll take out the kitchen. So that was, I don't know what that's a driveway. It just picked, I think this is part of the advertisement for the second kitchen. So all these documents we just attach to our search warrant. If I have an application, just various, like I said.
It's all out in plain sight. I mean, you could very easily build a case, extra meters. Because Orange and Rockland, which is the same group up here, they're not always going and dealing with the town in terms of some of these additional services. And they'll deal with fire inspector underwriters, but in terms of some of it, but they're not always getting the, following through on this. So you have the meters and stuff drop that may not actually, have an overall permit or certainly not a CFO. And so this becomes a real tip-off. When you're looking at a house, it should be only a single family or 2-family house, and they've gotten an extra service or 2, you know that there's a problem. Same thing like the meter panels. Obviously it's a single family house, but there's 3 meters. So they've got the meters dropped. They have the fire inspector, the fire underwriters potentially, looking at it, but they didn't get building permits or whatever else way back when, and they've got these multiple services in a house cut up, totally safe as a 3-family.
This is Board of Election Records, which I foiled, and they just sent me the entire disc, so you could just, I could put in an address and search and see who's living there. That's one way to do it. I actually have the whole, I guess they sent it to me, but it's easier if I just foil it, because sometimes it's hard to find it on that huge thing, but our Board of Elections, if I foil it, I get the material back within 24 hours. County Health Department notices it's not habitable, like that's another way to do it. Air conditioning in the attic, air conditioning in the basement. These are just examples of all the, and that was what I was talking about, that it has to be returned to the court, that a search warrant was made, and also just, it has to be fresh. You can't get all this evidence and expect to go get a search warrant. Like, it has to be dated and say this is what, on this date. You can't then go in 3 months later with that material. It has to be done within, I like to do it within a couple of days. So that's really how, it's really, again, I mean, I know we keep reiterating, but it's the eyes and the ears. Like I said, I've been somewhat proactive because I signed up to all these websites, which, obviously I can't manage to go through every single email every single day, but I try, at least early in the morning when I'm drinking my coffee, just to flip through, and I jot down on a piece of paper the addresses that are currently for rent. I mean, when I first started, I was really crazy. When I would go to some of these, I'm still crazy, but I used to be really crazy when I first started. Right when we first implemented our rental permit, which is all single and 2-family homes within the town of Clarkstown. If you don't live there, you're required to file a rental application and get a permit. So I was, I guess you could say I was crazy, or I was bored, or sitting watching football with my boys on a Sunday, and I took the computer and I just went to the Rockland County Clerk's website, and I went through every sale in the town of Clarkstown, and if it looked like it was an LLC, or it looked like it was, and I literally was writing down hundreds of addresses. It didn't even have to be an LLC, it could just any name. And then I would go and check, like, yeah, I mean, that's how, especially an LLC, like that was, to me, that's like, maybe it was an investment property. Or you could see whether it was a foreclosure and if it was going to be a flip house. So all those, we watched, the building department watched a list of those houses. A lot of them were totally fine, and a lot of them were rentals. But that was a way that we got also the word out there with the rental applications. So that's really,
We'll close with basically, so the procedures are in place now, the culture's been changed, this is what we do. So every complaint has to be investigated. If somebody calls us, they go to the 311, if they call my office, any of the town departments, someone's assigned to it, and some type of investigation takes place. If we find something from that, if notices are issued to the property owner, the owner's given a fixed period of time to comply. There's typically a 10-day cure period when there's a summons issued. That'll start the process. If we can't get compliance, then we take them to justice court with a summons that's issued beyond that. That gives us the period of discovery. If they're not cooperating with us, if we have somebody that's really ornery and doesn't want to work with us on that, that's where we may end up going for a search warrant, building additional information into it. Eventually follow-up inspections, and then court disposition if we have to. What's great is those numbers are up at 1,800 to 2,000 by the end of the year this year, but the court cases are not going up incrementally. People are complying. They're getting hit with violations and they know we mean business. And there have been a handful. Just speak very briefly about the couple of people that have re-violated and what you've done to ensure that we really can get after them.
okay, so I basically, and I don't know how many attorneys are here, but you can, somebody will plead guilty to the town code, I always make sure that there's a conditional discharge attached. And that condition allows, with the condition being that they maintain the property as it's meant to be, whether it's a one-family, two-family home, with the building department to allow to go back and re-inspect. Usually, I usually say without notice, but within business hours, for the period of the conditional discharge, which is 1 year, and a fine. And if we find that they have not complied, I am running right back into court with a violation of conditional discharge and a new charge. So I actually have one pending. It's a couple who, he's a doctor. He had a land disturbance issue. So we were out there for that. They discovered that he converted the garage to an apartment. So I brought him to court for the land disturbance and the illegal apartment. Or the legal conversion of the family in the garage. Those tenants that left, the town went in and did an inspection, everything was good. They still had to fix the land disturbance issue, permit problem, and we were pending in court with that. So finally we ended that, but somehow I found out maybe 6 months later, well, I brought them back to court because they never did what they were supposed to do on the land disturbance permit, but they actually, while it was still pending, they moved people back in to the garage. So I was like, nothing shocks me, but, so now I have them in court for still the land, I have a violation of conditional discharge and completely new charges for putting people back into the garage. But it gets better than that because somebody called the county health department on them. So they went in, and I keep bringing charges, additional charges, because every day obviously is a continued charge. So at this point, I think the judge is, it's actually on in court on Friday. The judge, we have in our town code, the judge could actually put somebody in jail for 15 days. I have never seen a judge put anybody in jail for a town code violation, but I think at one point he's so mad that he might, obviously after a hearing and a trial, they actually hired a lawyer this time.
Right, but with the conditional discharge, the original charge, even though it's been adjudicated because they violated it, then they're subject to an additional $1,500 fine on the first charge. They're now at a second charge, which starts at $2,500,
Right.
goes up.
That's way up. But everybody's code is written differently. Our penalties are, if you're found guilty of the same thing within 18 months, the minimum penalty is now $2,500, and it goes to $5,000. And the third time, I think it's $5,000 to $10,000 or $7,500 to $10,000. With you got to make your fines.
Yeah.
Because then it's more than the cost of doing business.
Right,
And I also, when I started, we also, since you've been there, we've re-added that you could, in addition, you could go to jail for up to 15 days.
right,
If
that
it's
was
a violation.
that was added. You couldn't go to jail before that's added. The other, we'll finish up on this. There was one landlord, not from our town, who has a bunch of rental properties within our town, kind of slummy properties. He had one in the Nanuet area, that was legal two-family, right?
Legal two-family converted to 4, and I think one of the pictures was that health department had gone in.
We brought him in,
To Supreme Court.
and it had been going on, the neighbors had been complaining for 10 years, nothing had happened. So we brought him in, and he agreed and converted it back to the two-family, and then he went back, figuring, okay, we're not going to follow up on it after it was done, and he went back and reconverted it again. So Leslie had done the conditional discharge, so we got him on violations in all the apartments again. All of a sudden, this guy who's making a good bit of money out of this, now he's not talking like he's getting 2,500, 2,500, 2,500, 2,500, plus the 1,500, 1,500, 1,500. All of a sudden, it's costing a lot of money, you know, to kind of go with this. And then, we didn't really kind of get into it, we do piggyback with the county, the Rockland County Codes Initiative. We will call the health department on some of the more egregious ones, and have the health department also, piggyback on our work. And we have good communication that goes back and forth, so then that has a multiplier effect. So if you're dealing with somebody that has, like in this situation, and he doesn't care because he's getting all cash rents and his rent roll is $10,000 a month or whatever it is, for the building, that's not going to mean anything. But if all of a sudden he's facing $20,000 worth of fines from the town, and the potential that I could go to jail for 15 days, and by the way, the county health department is now hitting me with health code violations that are a multiplier. All of a sudden he's facing $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 worth of fines. This ain't working. I'll keep it as a two-family. He hasn't reconverted the third time that we're aware of yet, but we watch him.
Yeah. Just one very last thing, just add on, the Rockland County, I don't know whether it's the health department, they have, and they've agreed not to do it, we're issuing permits for boarding houses within the town of Clarkstown, which would allow a homeowner to rent rooms. But our town code doesn't allow more than 2 boarders. So if you own a home, you can have 2 boarders as long as everybody has equal access to the whole house. So, but the Rockland County Health Department was issuing these rooming permits, boarding permits, to where they were having 4, 5, 6 people live there, that we had a meeting about it, and they've agreed that once those permits expire, that really our building code trumps that, and they will not reissue to those individuals. That was just the final thing.
So we threw a lot of information at you. You have the packet. We're happy to, I have my cards here, we can pass them around. We're happy to talk to you, take questions, and if you have additional follow-up, but we'll just leave you with the power's in your hands as a local government official, elected official, and you'd be surprised at what resources you have at your fingertips to be able to address some of these issues. Part of it is just changing the culture within your municipality, but it's using really what you have and redeploying the resources that you have. And when you start to get the buy-in from the residents, I happen to be, politics aside, I happen to be a Republican in a heavily Democratic town. I ran on, I'm going to enforce the building and zoning codes. I won against a career elected official who was 11 years as town supervisor. He spent $1 million. I spent $100,000. I beat him by 11 points. When I ran for re-election in 2017, I won by 14 points. And the people respond. This is what our people were looking for. Because as I said, people's wealth is tied to their homes. And you do your job protecting the zoning, in terms of, whatever the zoning is, and, but you've got to go that extra mile in terms of putting the teeth into enforcing the codes. And it can be problematic. I can tell you there's a couple of people that, there's one restaurant I can't go in and eat in the town anymore, because I never forgot the guy kind of in a broken English, who's this Leslie? Who's this Leslie? But you know what? It's the right thing to do, because everybody that lived around that guy were sick and tired of people coming and going, and sick and tired of all the issues that they were dealing with. And me, as a property owner, taxpayer, just like everybody else, I'm sick and tired of paying the freight for people that are abusing the system. And we mean business, and it's worked for us, so it can work for you guys too.
Thank you very much.